If you look just beneath the surface of our daily headlines, there's this incredibly high stakes conflict playing out, mostly in the shadows. It's this dangerous, clandestine game of strategy and, honestly, survival between Iran, the United States, and Israel. And that really brings us to the central puzzle here. I mean, with so much tension, right? All these strikes and counterstrikes, why hasn't this whole thing just exploded? Why hasn't this regional Cold War turned hot? It's a question that, believe me, keeps diplomats and military strategists up at night. So today, let's unpack it. Okay, so let's dive right in. It really boils down to three totally different and, yeah, often conflicting strategies. First up, you've got the US, and they're playing a game of deterrence. Think targeted strikes, protecting allies, all designed to keep things from escalating. Then there's Israel. Their approach? A bit more aggressive, but still really calculated. Their goal is to actively weaken any threats before they become bigger, but without, starting a huge fire they can't control. And finally, you have Iran. They rely on what's called asymmetric warfare, using their network of proxy groups to apply pressure without ever having to engage in a direct, full-scale fight. So, here's the real kicker. Each side absolutely has to look strong. They have to project power and resolve. But, and this is the crucial part, at the exact same time, every single one of them is desperate to avoid a full-blown catastrophic war. It's this incredibly tense, super delicate balancing act. And honestly, that balancing act defines this entire conflict. So this delicate balance has basically created a war on the brink. I mean, it's not a declared all-out conflict, not by a long shot. But there are these unwritten rules of engagement that everyone seems to be following. The problem is, breaking those rules, well, that carries some pretty immense risks. So what are the tripwires here? What could set this whole powder keg off? Well, you could have a major miscalculation by any side, or a strike that causes a lot of civilian casualties, an attack on a major city. Any of those could light the fuse. And pay attention to that last one, disrupting the Strait of Hormuz. That's not just a regional problem, folks. That is a global problem. Any one of these things could make this contained conflict spiral completely out of control. And that brings us right to the global ripple effect, because you might be sitting there thinking, hey, this is a distant conflict, what's it got to do with me? Well, the consequences could literally land right on your doorstep. Let's dig into why this really, really matters to you. Okay, it all starts right here, the Strait of Hormuz. And I'm not exaggerating when I say this is the single most important oil choke point on the entire planet. Seriously, the lifeline of the global economy runs directly through this one tiny strip of water. Just to give you a sense of scale, think about this number, 20%, a full fifth, 1 out of every 5 barrels of oil the entire world uses every single day passes through this one strait. That is an absolutely astonishing amount of energy concentrated in one extremely vulnerable spot. So what happens if that flow gets disrupted? Well, take a look. A conflict that even partially closes the strait could send oil prices absolutely skyrocketing. We're talking potentially blasting past $150 a barrel. That wouldn't just be a problem, it would be a massive shock to the entire global economy. And look, that kind of price spike, you wouldn't just feel it at the gas pump. Higher energy costs mean higher prices for everything. Your groceries, the stuff you order online, everything. It would fuel worldwide inflation, snarl up global supply chains, and probably send financial markets into a full-blown panic. The economic pain would be felt by pretty much everyone, everywhere. Which brings us to the core problem, right? This strategic stalemate. I mean, why can't everyone just sit down and work this thing out? It seems simple, but it's a puzzle that, for now anyway, seems to have no clear solution. And this really gets to the heart of it. See, the problem is one side's definition of success is the other side's definition of total failure. They're not just playing on the same board with different strategies, they're basically playing completely different games. So let's break that down a bit. For the US, the goal is containment and deterrence, basically just keeping a lid on things. For Israel, it's all about long-term security, which to them means actively chipping away at Iran's capabilities. And then you have Iran. For them, priority number one is survival of the regime itself. They're playing the long game, using strategic patience to endure and push back. As you can see, these goals are just fundamentally at odds. So, here's the bottom line. If you don't even have a shared objective, how can you possibly start to negotiate a lasting peace? There's just no common ground to build on. And that means a real, sustainable exit strategy, it's just completely out of reach for everybody involved. Okay, so if there's no easy way out, what does the future actually look like? Well, it seems like we're living in this unstable new normal, and it's pretty vital that we all understand what that really means. And for a country like the United States, things get even more complicated. Because on the one hand, you've got these core strategic interests, right? Protecting global trade, keeping energy supplies flowing. But on the other hand, you have domestic politics and super polarized media narratives that tend to oversimplify everything. That creates a ton of pressure and can sometimes amplify the conflict way beyond what's strategically necessary. All right, let's flip the script for a second and look at this from Iran's perspective. I mean, they're caught between all these different pressures, they're facing sanctions, military threats. So what can they actually do to push their goals forward without triggering a catastrophic war? Well, this kind of lays out their playbook, and it's got a few different prongs. First, they rely heavily on those asymmetric tactics, using their proxies. Second, they engage in cyber and information warfare. Third, they use whatever diplomatic and economic leverage they can pull together. And fourth, when the opportunity arises, they'll pursue negotiation, usually through third parties. It's all designed to operate just below that critical red line of all-out war. But even without a major war, this stalemate comes at a really grim price. We're seeing chronic instability across the entire region. We're seeing persistent disruptions in energy markets that, yes, affect all of us. And maybe most tragically, there are just immense humanitarian costs for the ordinary people who are caught in the middle of it all. And all of this leaves us with a final, pretty unsettling question. In a high-stakes game where none of the players can really see a clear path to an exit, is this what we have to get used to? This constant state of tension, this volatile standoff that's always teetering on the edge of disaster, is this just the new normal?